Self-imposed limitation. Yeah, and limited exposure I think was one of the best answers, because people don't understand they have a creative capacity, creative ability. And in trading, what do you think you need the most of? What bracket of intelligence do you need the most of? Creative intelligence, believe it or not. Or some kind of creative ability, wherever that stems from. Anyway, so again, another example of a poor position you don't want to be taking because of where it's positioned up here. Let's get the shades back on. I find a lot of times I journal a trade, I realize I make mistakes on things I already know, and I shouldn't be making the mistake. Would you say that's an impulse issue? Because making mistakes on things you already know can't be a skill-based or a technical-based issue either. It's definitely an emotional issue for a fact. Because if you know it, then your emotions overriding your logic. Right, yeah, there's definitely an emotional issue then. If it's not an experience-based problem, it's an emotional issue. What's happening is, this is where emotional thinking is and this is where logical thinking is. You're crossing that barrier because you're not aware of where that barrier is crossed. Something is triggering you to cross this barrier over here, where then you go into emotional thinking, where logical thinking doesn't exist anymore. And then when that wears off after the trade's done and you go back into logical thinking again, you start to see things for what they actually are and you realize, what the was I doing? That is a very frustrating situation to be in, but only you can fix that. You have to be aware of when that crossover happens, why it happens, what traits are occurring in that situation, and then you just prevent it before it happens. Prevention is better than cure. Don't let something become worse before it gets worse. There's nothing really too crazy going on at the moment. What date are we on? We're on the 27th of December 2023. Right, and off we go. Let's take all of this off. Have one more glance on the higher time frames where we're positioned. Whoa, that's a lot of trades. That's all the trades that we've taken so far. To be fair, to think about it, we've had how many trades? Closed positions down here. 18 trades from what date period? 6th of December, it's American date. 6th of December 2022. So in a year, to have 18 trades and have an unrealized or realized P&L of 181k on one single pair without being confined to one time frame, without feeling stressed. I know we're testing, but every single trade circumstance that we've done and that we've tested, we've put it in real time as to what would you be doing in this situation had you have missed 3 trades, had you have lost a few trades, if you guys remember in the webinars, where I've tried to make it as realistic as possible. They were never stressful or complicated entries. All of these entries are consistent. Anybody who's been to these webinars or attended them over the past 3, 4, 5 sessions, every single one of these trades is consistent with one another. And the thinking process, like I mentioned in today's video, that's the key thing, that's consistent. Anyway, enough talking, let's carry on. So we're not really at a major area of value that I can see. However, we're approaching one. We're on the weekend at the moment. Okay, what's happened here? So same thing that I mentioned before, for those of you who recall, we have a near miss. The near miss doesn't have to be met straight away. Sometimes price can build volume to find volume. Where's the next point of volume? And it's down there. So what does it seem like it's doing now? I mean, this is almost correcting near and around that low. So it doesn't give me the idea that this is just gonna go like this and just rock it up. Could this be going lower? Or could this just trickle and then use that as an area to have a failed continuation? So is this really a risk entry area or not when I look at it? I mean, we've kind of tapped into it, we've not really tapped into it much. Technically speaking, if I just look at that, yes, we've got heavy body candles, but we've broken out. We've got the exhaustion 30% over here. It's really just 1 and 2 heavy candles. We have the initial exhaustion here. If that didn't exist and it was just 1 and 1, I'd take the insurance entry. We do have the retrace candle there. Is there a 4-hour entry? No, there's not. And it's a 4-hour structure. Right, there you go. I knew there'd be something. It's a 4-hour structure, which means a 4-hour entry should be taken, but there's no 4-hour candle available. So that means on the lower time frames, I'll have to get an insurance entry because it's too big to risk entry on the H1. Does that make sense, by the way? And now this is getting to a point where this is getting a bit too big and this is not worth entertaining whatsoever. This is an example of what I mentioned before as to this is getting a lot larger than the correction. So is this now worth taking as an entry over here as a risk entry? Definitely not. This is an entry that you'd have to stay out of. Now, this is point number 1. Imagine now, let's put you in a scenario again, where you have, let's say for example, you are minus 2% on your FTMO account and you are trading for a 200K account, $200,000 account, and you've been doing pretty well, but you've just taken a few losses, taken 3 unnecessary losses, and you're annoyed. And let's make this even more realistic. I'm proper like putting fuel on the fire right now. And you're gonna laugh at how relatable this might be. What else can we throw in there? Your partner is pressuring you. What's another realistic thing that could really be triggering you? All right, missed trades. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's an obvious one actually. Missed a trade for 7%. So with 0.5% risk, that would have been 3.5%, and that would have taken you out of drawdown. Bills, all these things. We can write this down. This is a realistic scenario. What do you think now? This person now is going to be forecasting something like this. A strong H1 push lower, clear insurance entry. with a near miss. All right, in debt as well. Near miss, a strong H1 confirmation, etc, etc. What is this now an example of what they're doing here? That's a symptom of something that I want to talk about. But what is this? This is a coping mechanism. Also, let's go a bit deeper than that. What else would they be doing here? What else is this an example or a symptom of? What they're doing, have you noticed how they're only looking at the positive and how they've missed out the most obvious, simple thing, that the insurance entry is corrected longer or larger than 50 than the impulse. I mean, the impulse, there's not even one there, it's just a candle. So you know when I talked about in the video today that sometimes there's going to be one confluence that writes a trade off. You know, every trade will have a negative confluence and most of the time they won't even matter. Like the Aussie dollar example, it was on a low, doesn't really matter, right? Because in the grand scheme of things, it's not enough of a heavy confluence to write the trade off. Risk is mainly in your favor. In this scenario, what's the difference? There is one negative confluence, but it's enough to write the trade-off because the entry now has become useless, pretty much. This is what I say, you got to understand the entry confluences. You would have taken that trade, let's see if you would have. Was there an entry? I mean, you could argue that if someone is in that emotional state, they're going to look at that and think, technically, I've got a high test there. Yeah, it's weak, but you know, we've got everything we need. I don't want to be a perfectionist. They might have missed that trade on 7% because they were actually being genuinely too perfect and they didn't really understand the criteria too well and they waited for too much and they maybe genuinely did that. But now they're using that as a reason to say, well, I don't want to be perfect now because I've missed 7%. So let me just take the trade. And then they take another loss and then straight downhill again. And this is all just a symptom of just not knowing what your criteria is. That's it. And what's happened is because they've let themselves cross that emotional barrier where logical thinking now just gets thrown out the window completely, they're not going to acknowledge the fact that actually this is longer than the impulse that formed it. Or even worse, they might, but their brain's just going to ignore it. They're going to think, yeah, screw it, I don't want to think about that right now. What if this makes me money? Never what if this takes me out for a loss. Because you see, before that, if I was to annotate that on and say, would this be a loss? And if it was, would I be happy with it? I would never be happy with that loss. So why am I going to take the trade if I'm not going to be happy with the loss? Question from the risk entry opportunity in this one. If a structure is a certain size and visible in the 4 hour, would you no longer take? Correct. That's my recommendation. If you can see the structure on the H4, which means that you can actually identify what it is, like I can clearly tell you without looking at the time frame that that is forming a 3-touch, right? Then very clearly I'm going to stick to that time frame, because if you've got the option for that higher time frame to enter the trade, why not? Because it's safe. The same way, if you can see something on the H1, let's say you can't see it on the 4 hour, why are you going to take it on the 15? Take it on the H1. So take it on the safest time frame where you can see it, basically. And that will save you a lot. Build your profitability off of that first. It's never negatively affected me, put it that way. All right, so this is just doing its thing, and look what happens in hindsight. This is why I always say track your trades a week in advance, a week after, sorry, to see, look, that's what they form into. Look at the story that you were selling yourself on versus what actually happened a week later. What does this look like on the higher time frame it's forming? It does look like it's forming in ascending. Is this technically a safe area to be taking a risk entry? Could you say we've broken the low? Not really, we're correcting through the low. I don't personally think it is a safe area to be taking a risk entry. There's nothing wrong here with taking an insurance entry, and depending on if we get a strong 4 hour close that achieves even a slight washout, that's a risk I'm happy taking. And I'll explain why in a second. Let's just play this forward and see what we get. And also, by the way, let me just add it on, especially where this trade's positioned, you want the odds to be in your favor. So don't be risk entering that. You'll be trapped into a trade like this and most of the time it'll just tag you in and out. But in this case, they don't even work out too well. Right, now this is changing ever so slightly. What's happening here now? What can you see? This is forming something else. This is clearly responding to something. So this is getting longer and longer and longer. Could you technically play that as a H4 candle over there? I'm not, because personally I don't like the shape of the structure. I actually remember this trade. We have to look at it in reality as well. We are realistically floating almost like 180k in profit here. So losing 4 grand on this trade isn't really going to be an issue. So I can actually afford the risk, technically. But remember, I'm talking about in reality here. You can have other pairs on watch. You can't let your mind get infected just because you're in profit. That's my biggest tip. When you're in profit, it's the easiest time to fall off when you're at the top of the mountain. The wind's going to hit you harder. Just imagine it that way. So when you're up there, you've got to carry on doing the things that got you up there, because there's always another mountain to climb. So just because we made all this profit doesn't now mean we sacrifice our trade quality. Doing it once is fine, but that can have a snowball effect. That's all I'm warning you about. So there is an entry there technically on the H4, but again, I'm not a fan of it. Is there anything here on the lower time frame? Not really. Oh, there is that. Okay. Am I better positioning my risk over here? I know this is a very heavy drop, and I know that this is not proportionate to the impulse that's formed it. I'm very well aware of that. if you have a look at it here as well. We just highlight all the lows. Let me take this off. And I'm going to make this black and white clear for everybody. This has come from a heavy drop. This is not proportionate. If you're in drawdown, don't take these trades because they are higher in risk. What's happening here is price has broken through this, which means what? The chances of it coming back higher and forming something else isn't really the best, isn't really the highest. It's also come on this low and responded in this fashion. So if anything, this does have slight bit of sell volume in it where it can continue. Do I believe this can be the kind of move that can carry on and go here? I highly doubt it. But if I know I can position myself in a way where I can take risk off the table a bit more aggressively, and I'm in the position to afford the risk, as you can see at the bottom there, is this now a trade worth taking? To find out whether it's going to work or not. Yes, of course it is. So do you see how I'm trying to build that relationship with risk like I talked about in the Discord video? That's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about with risk and understanding it. On one scenario, it's not a trade worth taking. On the other scenario, it is. And it all depends where you're positioned as a trader. But look at what I'm trying to look for. Think about what I'm trying to think about. Forget the trade. Look at how I'm thinking. I'm concerned about, why is this higher in risk? Heavier drop. Look what it's come off the back of. 1, 2, and 3. A lot of volume accumulation here. If anything, there's a 90%, go back to the basics, there's a 90% chance of it hitting 90% of the range, which is around about here. So if I can get myself in there, knowing and by the way, that 90% rule only exists, and this is going back to 2018 Falcon, that 90% rule only exists if the structure breaks impulsively. So do we have an impulsive move? Yes, we do. Because we have an impulsive break, that 90% rule of it hitting 90% of the range, which starts from here, and there you go. So 0, 100, 90 is about here. The chances of that happening is very high. Therefore, I can position myself in this trade up here, and I can trade it on the 15. I don't need to trade it on the 5-minute because it's available on the 15. I can get involved with a 10 or even slightly tighter. Not that I'd recommend it to anyone new, but I'm just giving you an example. Let's even call it an 8.5. Down to here, you've got just under a 3 to 1. It's not the 3 to 1 that I'm bothered about. It's the fact that I can get to break even. And if this trade does commit, we've got this on the left, which is a key detail. Look at all that. That's pure impulsive price action. There's no stopping point. Therefore, if it does break, that can be a pretty big move. So for a trade that I can get to break even pretty quickly on, that can turn into an 8 to 1, whether it's a rare scenario or not, it has the possibility of doing that. Why not open the risk up to do that if I can afford to do it? Right, Ben, good question. So it goes back to the same point. If I can see it on the 15, I don't need to go to the 5 because the 15-minute candle already provides me with a strong enough retrace. Secondly, whether I go to the 5 or 15, a 10 pip stop is still up here. So what am I going to get? 4 pip stop, a 3 pip? Where's the limit? Right, I still want to be protected above here, and I can still achieve that with a 15-minute. So if I can willingly be in a safer scenario, why would I willingly choose to go to a less safe scenario with a lower time frame that has less weight? Always stick to what gives you more weight. It's the best tip I can give you. Trust me, if you can see it on that time frame, trade it on that time frame. Yes, you can get away with that here, Ryan, because the structure is still intact. It's a lower time frame structure. That's again another factor. Okay, candle, the size of the impulse. That's why this trade is higher in risk. But you need to go back, like I said, forget the trade for a minute. Look at how I'm thinking, look how I'm viewing risk. Forget the trade. The trade at the moment is second priority. The first priority is, how can I position myself and expose my risk? I'm up in profit by quite a bit. All my trades are consistent. That's the key thing. Every single trade has been consistent. The thinking has been consistent. The risk exposure has been consistent. It's been very, very consistent through and throughout. So when I'm looking at this and I'm seeing, if this is going to tag me out in and out, I can afford that to happen, number one. I'm also playing it on the 15. And I'm also playing a trade, by the way, and this is the key detail, where if we break, this is the channel over here, whenever we break a structure like this impulsively, which we did here on this candle, there is a 90% chance that 90% of the range is going to be met. Not guaranteed, but a 90% chance, and that's a very high strike rate. So if I know that that 90% is around about here, and I can position myself up here, and I can do it in a way where I can take risk off the table very quick, why not take that risk, right? 180K doesn't matter. I'm talking about, I'm in profit, so I can do that. Would I take this trade, or should you take this trade if you're in drawdown? No, you shouldn't. That's as simple as you want to keep it. We know the negatives. They're not enough to write the trade off completely, but they would be if you were -2, -3. If you're in profit, it's calculated risk and it's a sensible risk. That would actually also severely change if this was a really exhaustive move down. Then I wouldn't take the trade, because now there isn't that 90% chance of 90% of the range being met. So you see, I'm using the knowledge to my advantage and using the correct confluence to my advantage. Yeah, priced to anything. Mainly to channels, to 3 touches. How did you manage to manage the euphoria of winning without this feeling getting out of control, considering that it can be very destructive? Bro, all the principles that are taught in Rewired, Mark was teaching us them without Rewired, obviously there at the starting stages, without having it in that condensed form, which is why you guys are so lucky, honestly, to have that. All those lessons were being taught to us. We were noting them down and we were learning to think how he thinks. Now you guys have got that literally in module format. You know, we didn't have that back then. We just had Mark's knowledge and wisdom there and there throughout. It was up to us to take proper notes and really apply it and really understand the depth behind what he's saying. But because you've got that in condensed format, I would rinse the hell out of it. Use Rewired and the modules in there to study the gaps within yourself that need fixing. And if you don't know what they are, then you need a self-assessment. You need to sit down and think, where am I lacking? What traits do I not have that I need to have? And what traits do I have that are actually holding me back? If you do feel you get euphoric, what is that? Get to the root of it. It's different for everybody. Everybody has a different trigger as to what gets them euphoric or why they are, because their relationship to money is different. You know, so you can fix that through self-image correction and so many other modules that are in there that you can study to fix key areas in your trading. But if you're going through it, that's like me reading this phenomenal book, Think and Grow Rich, and just reading it blindly. You know what Napoleon Hill says in the beginning? I'll get it for you exactly, but it said it somewhere in the beginning here, and it's about how to best use this book. Here you go. He's literally put it there. I don't know if you can see that. It's a bit bright. He literally says the most profitable way to use this book. He says, after reading the story starting on page 66, you will realize that you're about to come into possession of a philosophy that can be transmuted into material wealth, etc. The author discovered through personally analyzing hundreds of successful men that all of them followed the habit of exchanging ideas. He talks about masterminding in here, right? And actually applying it in real time and getting around people that think the same and having a reading club or something that he said. Get around people and read the book together and dissect it together because it will help you discover yourself. That is so true. If you want to dig into your mind and reframe this, get around people, other people in the Rewired community, jump on a call with them, go through modules together. That's amazing, and think, right, where are you lacking? Where am I lacking? They might see something in you that you don't. But you can do it however you like. But point is, go through it to study yourself. That's the key thing. Don't just go through it to study it. Study it to study yourself. Right, let's just put this trade on because I can technically afford this risk. I'm just going to replay it back. Candle's weak, completely understand, but again, I'm not going to give this more attention to study it more or to explain it more because it's super, super simple. Right, advanced order, we'll put on the 1% risk. All right, I'm going to take the take profit off. I'm going to sell that there. All right, so let's put this in real time. How would I actually manage this? So obviously triggered me in, slow that down a bit more. We are currently right, 3 p.m. close. Now, what do I say about large body candles? They tend to retrace about 50% or 75%, but this is enough. I don't need to lock in profit. I can easily move to break even and be comfortable with that, like so. Let's play that forward. Where I'm going to be locking in profit, by the way, is if this starts to hover around here, then I can lock in about 1.2, something like that, we'll see. All right, so we're running about, at the moment, in terms of profit and loss, 20 grand. This is 1% risk. And again, it goes back to my point. Imagine now you have a scenario you've never seen. Let's assume this is the first time you're seeing 20k profit. What is going to be, do you reckon, the first thought process that goes into the average person's mind if they've never seen more than 2 grand in their bank account and they have a certain thermostat of spending, they have a certain level, they have a certain price, basically, what they're used to? What do you think they're going to do here? They're going to close the trade. Part of me would say, if it's your first time seeing this kind of money, lock in aggressively because you want to experience that as well, right? That is true. But my point is this, you can't just tell that person, just follow your plan. You can't. They're not going to just follow their plan if it's the first time seeing 20 grand worth of profit, is it? You know, and this is my point. People don't study their relationship with money and really understand how it can affect their decision making until it gets real on bigger account, right? So we'll talk about it. I'm in profit. I can be a bit more lenient and relaxed. I'm going to lock in about, call it 2.4 as an example. So I will lock in profit around there. If you're in drawdown, you wouldn't take this trade, would you? Caught you there, Ashton. That's the key thing. So I'm in profit, that's why I'm taking this trade. Little trick for you there. All right, so let's carry on. I want you guys to pay attention to the numbers at the bottom as well. And by the way as well, this is not responding to anything on the left. So I can't see this turning around from anything on the left other than it's just breaking low. This to me looks like it's just going to carry on going. Probably going to, do all this and whatever. So do I want to lock in a bit more? I'm sizing out what the correction could look like. Probably around this sort of size. That's to what's relevant in terms of sequence. I can lock in a little bit more. So that turns out to be 2.7. And I'm happy to walk away with that. Right, that's my high now. So that's what I'm looking at. Still, again, no reason to lock in any more profit at this stage. And then it's obviously tagged me out. That's 11,000 profit. Now you see, In backtesting, it's very easy to just win, and I'm fully well aware of that. But what you'll notice I've done in these webinars is I've made it very clear from the beginning, I'm not going to hindsight trade and just say, oh yeah, I will go back through the webinars and study them. Every trade has the same thinking process behind it. Every trade is consistent. Now all I've got to do is just apply that in real time. Is it as easy as that? Of course it's not. You build your skill level up to it. But it's easier to do when you know what the hell to look for and your thinking and trade processes are consistent. But if you don't know that, and you know what the number one way to get confused is? And the number one way to not do exactly what I mentioned is if you